Syracuse Sports is back. You know what else is back? Syracuse football. Training camp is here. We are a month away from Syracuse, Tennessee, Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You ready? Syracuse is ready. We're ready to bring you training camp updates as well. That's why not only this very podcast, we'll have plenty of podcasts to come on all things Syracuse football and what's happening at training camp, the quarterback battle, the other position battles, and all you need to know about Syracuse football. But being a Syracuse Sports Insider, this is prime time for you guys because the first thing that Chris Carlson, Javon Edmonds, and I do when we walk off the practice field is we text you our insights, our analysis, our opinion, photos, videos, and so much more, as they like to say in those late night commercials. So, you're a Syracuse Sports Insider. You know that, and that's to come. But spread the word. Tell your friends that to get the best training camp coverage, you got to be a Syracuse Sports Insider. It's just $3.99 a month. Try it free for 2 weeks. All the info is there on your screen if you're watching on YouTube or in the show notes to sign up today. So what I did is I sent out a beacon to our Syracuse Sports Insiders, and I said, what's on your mind as training camp is starting? And this being 2025, we're going to give you 25 thoughts from the insiders. Just what's on their mind, what they're thinking about, what they want to see, and what they'll be curious to keep an eye on as camp goes along. So your thoughts on Syracuse football training camp and what is happening with this football team to come. What I'm going to start today with, though, is a conversation with S.L. Price. He's a Sports Illustrated writer. He's written several books about sports. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it on my little shelf there. It's a book called The American Game. This is a book that I read when I was on my little summer vacation recently. It is absolutely the best thing I've ever read on the sport of lacrosse. And I have read pretty much everything on lacrosse. As somebody who played the game, is passionate about the game. Lacrosse is my favorite sport. It's my favorite sport to cover. And it's all addressed in this book on what lacrosse is in the history of the game. I think most people are somewhat aware that lacrosse is the medicine game. It's the creator's game. It is something that is just deeply embedded into the Native American community, particularly the Haudenosaunee here in central New York, the Onondagas. This is a book that is dripping with Syracuse, Haudenosaunee, Onondaga references. You're going to hear and see a lot of familiar names. SL really gets into, frankly, some of the warts over the years that the sport has endured, where it's at now and where it's going. Particularly, there's kind of a beacon off in the not so far distance here. We know that lacrosse will be a showcase sport in the upcoming Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. But will the Haudenosaunee be involved in that? So many characters, so many familiar names, maybe some people you learn about in the sport. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think if you have an appreciation for sports history, if you have roots here in central New York and want to learn about the history of the sport and how it's all rooted in Syracuse, in central New York, then this is the book for you. So I want to bring in our guy, Scott Price. S.L. Price is his pen name, if you will, to talk about his amazing book and then 25 thoughts at the start of Syracuse football training camp. And we will attempt to answer those questions and thoughts for you as camp goes along here. Just a reminder, though, that we love to feature your original music here on Syracuse Sports. James and the Q-Sonics, we have featured them before. We're happy to feature them again. So what we're going to do now, and we can do this for you, your band, your original music, get in touch. We'd love to feature it here on the podcast. This is a song called Work It. We'll play a Work It here to transition into the next part of the podcast, and then we'll play the song in its entirety at the end of the podcast. And all the info on our featured band today, James and the Q-Sonics, is in the show notes. So let's listen to that, and then we'll listen to S.L. Price tell us all about his amazing book, The American Game. So, Scott, spending so much time in Syracuse in central New York on the Onondaga Nation and kind of the heart of lacrosse, as our friend Oren Lyon said, pointing at that table right here. I'm just curious, like, what did you learn about not only the game, but the roots of the game in Syracuse, in central New York? What were your big takeaways about having spent so much time here and what the game means to this area?
Well, I mean, it again. Lars Tiffany was as sort of an embodiment of that was really helpful in the sense that obviously the Native American roots I was exposed to and felt through Oren Lyons and the Onondaga and the Iroquois in general. But Lars also grew up, watching. He went to Lafayette High, which is a high school power. He and while playing there, sort of played the sort of native style of lacrosse at Lafayette, and was his best friends with Joe Solomon and Travis Solomon's brother. And so he went. Lars like sort of first introduction to Syracuse, to sort of big time college lacrosse, was going to see Syracuse beat in the incredible upset, which remains probably the greatest and most galvanizing upset in the history of college lacrosse. Syracuse coming back in the second half and upsetting Johns Hopkins in 1983, and essentially kicking off the great Syracuse dynasty under Roy Simmons Jr. And so Lars was at that game, and that sort of like blew his mind in terms of lacrosse and how great it could be, and of course that expanded throughout the territory, throughout the Syracuse area. Its rivalry with Hopkins became legendary. With Duke, and Syracuse under Roy Simmons became this astonishing power, which obviously, in many ways, his dad obviously had not created, but really had firmed up and been one of the great coaches of the Syracuse program for decades. Coached, of course, Jim Brown, who in many eyes remains, the greatest lacrosse player of all time. I think that's it's sort of an easy thing to say, and it's convenient for the sport. At this point, there have been so many greats since that it's a little bit tougher to make that case. But overall, he's one of the all-time greats. There's no question. And at Syracuse, he also loved lacrosse. Jim Brown did far more than playing football, which of course Jim Brown is known as perhaps the greatest running back in NFL history. An incredible all-around athlete, and he adored lacrosse, and he adored Roy Simmons. He encountered racism at Syracuse, but Roy Simmons really provided Jim Brown with a great haven, and essentially because of Roy Simmons, who was an assistant football coach, being so welcoming and helpful to Jim Brown. Jim Brown essentially played lacrosse at Syracuse because of Roy Simmons Jr.'s father. So there's this incredible depth that went even before the the great NCAA sort of run by Syracuse and how it became a power in the 80s and 90s. And of course, two of Jim Brown's teammates were Oren Lyons, who was an All-American goalie at Syracuse, and Roy Simmons Jr. So the depth and the depth of the game in the Syracuse area, and frankly in upstate New York, and of course its source is essentially on both sides of the St. Lawrence River, that area, upstate New York and into Ontario, as sort of the source and the home of the game. Just the layers of it were astonishing and incredibly rich. I'm a sports writer, obviously by name or by because I was at Sports Illustrated, but I love American history, and there's so much of it, again, that I was able to delve into that involves Syracuse, George Washington, the fact that George Washington was known as Town Destroyer because of how he wiped out and invaded Onondaga territory. People don't know that the treaty going back to 1794, the Treaty of Canandaigua. I went up to Canandaigua to sort of witness the ceremony that's held every year there. So the resonance of this game, that's the astonishing thing. We're talking about, people talk about baseball and football, well, it goes back to the 30s and back into the late 1800s. This sport goes back centuries in that area,
much longer.
And it's got a depth there that really is resonant, rich, and needs to be explored further.
What I think people will really take away from this, and I kind of take this for granted living here in Syracuse, Scott, we certainly are surrounded by the Onondagas, the Haudenosaunee, and the story of how the game, there's a great scene in your book where Oren Lyons, he does the point at the table. You guys are having breakfast at Firekeepers, a great spot, as I'm sure you came to find out here. And he's like, right here, this is where this game was.
Literally was pounding on the table
right
here. And I'm like,
right here.
I'm like, right here at this table?
This spot right here. That's where the first game was.
Yeah.
And I think people are aware of certainly Syracuse lacrosse and its history, but you opened up so many doors that I didn't know. And I think a lot of people will really come to appreciate about the origins of the game itself. The true American game, as the title of your book says. But as you were going through that, and maybe you came into that with some kind of understanding, were you just opening up more and more doors, and maybe that's why the book took you a little longer than you thought, because this thing was so much deep rooted than maybe you had expected it to be once you started talking to Oren Lyons and others individuals that are named in the book and learning its history?
Well, yes and no. What I mean is that in 2010, when I did the piece for Sports Illustrated on the Iroquois Nationals, and remember, that was the time when the Nationals were trying to travel to the World Championships in England, and because of the passport controversy, they, ended up not going. So I was well aware of the Treaty of Canandaigua. I was well aware of the push for sovereignty and the deep roots of the game from having done that story. What I didn't expect, what changed for me while doing this book were two things. One is that while doing the book, obviously COVID hit, and I was originally going to write the book. I went to Israel in 2018 for the World Championships, and my thought was I'm going to sort of build a narrative around the World Championships in Israel, because that's just such a strange and incongruous site for a lacrosse championship, and have the book come out in time for the 2022 World Championships, for the next World Championships. Well, as we all know, the COVID pandemic happened and delayed everything, and at the same time, and pushed back the World Championships to 2023, and at the same time, the Olympic push by lacrosse and the Haudenosaunee in conjunction with that sort of gained steam and momentum. And so as a result, that sort of delayed things, because I realized, well, this is not only the history of the sport, but it's the history of the sport taken to a new and international level in real time right now. Like, it's living and happening as we speak. And if not only is that fascinating, but it makes the book relevant as not just a history book, but as a gloss on what's happening right now and what will happen in the future. This is still an open question, whether or not the Haudenosaunee will be able to participate in 2028 in the Summer Olympics.
But what they're still trying to figure out, and I wonder kind of where we're at as we speak on this, Scott, will the International Olympic Committee recognize the Haudenosaunee as a sovereign nation to play in these Olympics? And whether they do or not, this is going to be a huge deal, because if they don't, there is certainly going to be a major backlash here. Here you're featuring this sport. They are the spirit of the game, literally. And if they don't let them in, this is going to be literally an international incident in a way.
Well, it's kind of extraordinary, because there was a template, and a precedent for this that the IOC witnessed firsthand, which was the World Games in Birmingham.
Right.
So originally, when those games were announced and were being organized, the Haudenosaunee were not invited, and what ensued was what you're exactly hinting at, or is that there was a massive outcry within the sport, and without. There was a social media outcry. There was all the stakeholders in the game came forward. Very famous influencers like Paul Rabel and Joe Tsai, who's basically the money man behind the sport at this point, all came forward and said, the Haudenosaunee need to be in a championship. That's that, and as a result, the World Games. And I apologize. It's a very confusing thing. There's World Championships. The World Games is a competition, essentially an Olympic-like competition for sports that are trying to get into the Olympics, trying to be recognized and become an Olympic sport. So, and it's recognized by the IOC and is sort of IOC adjacent. And IOC observers go to sort of take in this tournament when it's held every 4 years. So this happens. The World Games back down, and then admit the Haudenosaunee in, and in one of the most extraordinary sort of demonstrations of sportsmanship, Team Ireland, who were first going to be part of the World Games, surrenders their position because they're saying no, we don't belong there. The Haudenosaunee do. They not only are they the creators of the game, but they're the third ranked team in the world. It's absurd that we're going and they're not. So this entire outcry happens, and the World Games backs down. So, and the Haudenosaunee go and win the controversy, okay, as they almost always will, because they're entirely a sympathetic figure in the larger culture, and as inventors of the game, and one of the top powers in the game on American soil, you would imagine that their justification for being there is pretty, unimpeachable. So the IOC sees all this, and yet after this in 2023, they admit the lacrosse as a sport for the 2028 games. And then it almost immediately issue an edict saying, well, but the Haudenosaunee are not allowed to play, and it was kind of incomprehensible because they knew what was coming, they know what the issues are, and yet they admitted lacrosse as a sport, just sort of like taking this hornet's nest and bringing it into their office essentially. It's really an incomprehensible stand, because there's a reason that they're saying that they're fearful of allowing the Haudenosaunee to play. They don't recognize the Haudenosaunee as a nation, and they're fearful that other indigenous people, like the Aboriginal people of Australia, say, or the Catalans in Spain, would then insist on their admission. But there is nothing like the Haudenosaunee. And it would be and its relationship to lacrosse. They're a top power. They invented the game. They're the soul of the game. It's a game on U.S. soil. Everything about this situation is unique, and would be a massive public relations boon for the IOC to allow them to play, and a huge disaster if they don't allow them to play. So where we are now is that there's a new president of the IOC. Since all those statements, including, I checked with the IOC because I had an excerpt in the New York Times Magazine, and went back to the IOC in February and then again in May, and they again issued the same statement. Well, the Haudenosaunee are can play for either the U.S. or Canada, but not compete under their own flag. So where we are now is that there's a new president, Kirsty Coventry, and the Haudenosaunee. She seems to be open to a meeting with the Haudenosaunee and World Lacrosse on this issue. That's there's almost no question that there's going to be conversations about this, and now we're looking at some kind of possible compromise, and both sides are going to have to give a little bit, because they're both sort of set in stone. The Haudenosaunee really want to compete under their own flag. The IOC has been very insistent and very hard line on that against. And of course, the possible compromise is that, like something like the refugee Olympic team from 2016 and ensuing Olympics, which has been a massive public relations boon for the IOC of great success, is that the Haudenosaunee would possibly compete under the Olympic flag. Now, so far, the Haudenosaunee have been very, very, very hard line about this, and of course they've certainly demonstrated in the past that they're not going to budge on their issue of sovereignty. I find it hard to believe that, given the choice of having a billion, a TV audience of billions being, watching them, and with the overall arching mission of in Native American and Native America, and among, obviously the Haudenosaunee, of we are still here. We are still here. This is the message that Native Americans are constantly pounding on the table and saying, and understandably so, given that opportunity to be able to march in with their Haudenosaunee Nationals jerseys and being able to demonstrate their game. If it's under an Olympic flag, I find it hard to believe that they would turn that down. But we'll see.
And I'm thinking of Oren Lyons there too, Scott, because as you demonstrate very well in your book, this is a man who has been an activist his whole life, has fought hard. He rarely allows himself moments to relax, to smile, to recognize small victories along the way. If they march in under their flag at the Olympics, what a moment that would be for them. And I'm kind of wondering the moment it would be for the sport. It would certainly be significant to see that sport it's already going to be a part of the Olympics, but what's going to happen as a result of that? Because Scott, as somebody who grew up playing the game and has been around the game practically my whole life, what we've heard so much is lacrosse is the game on the up. It's the fastest growing sport in the country at the high school level for a lot of years. It's almost like soccer. We've heard for so long, like youth soccer and USA soccer it certainly made huge gains, particularly on the women's side. But with lacrosse, I feel like as much as it's never been more mainstream in some ways, that there's still so far to go for the sport. And the Olympics, I think, would give that a huge punch. But the biggest thing we have that you can look at and say they've made progress at right now is the Premier Lacrosse League, which Paul Rabel started, and I think he's doing an incredible job with. Yet the PLL has a lot of room to grow. He's done an incredible job with media deals and using social media to his advantage. He's very well spoken. He's good looking guy. He's married to a Hollywood actress who's currently in the Fantastic Four. Like, getting exposure is not a problem for Paul Rabel. Getting more people to go to these lacrosse events is something they're working on, because as much as the Final Four gets huge crowds and the lacrosse crowd loves and embraces the game, there's still so much room to bring in people from outside the game. So I guess my long-winded way to ask the question is it hurting lacrosse in a way that it's still seen as a game where people that are in it kind of have an ownership of it, and people outside of it need to feel more welcome that they can come in and be a part of this thing? Or what do you think is like holding up that progress that maybe the sport should have been at to this point?
Well, let me just tell you that I completely agree with you. I mean, Paul has done an incredible job with the PLL. And one of the great and undersung achievements is a professional league that actually has health care for its players.
Yeah.
I mean that tells you a little bit about the development of professional lacrosse. That just getting health care is a great victory. But you're exactly right. I mean, in terms of contracts and social media presence, the sport's doing great, and obviously it's growing as a sport overall, geographically and in terms of participation. But you look in the stands at those PLL games, there aren't a lot of people. I mean, there's not a lot of camera work that goes in and sits back and looks at the stands. And what that is the people who love lacrosse are going to games and tuning in. But Paul even speaks about, we've got to get that non-endemic lacrosse fan, which is the casual fan who's never played basketball but is fascinated by the NBA. Like, there's plenty of that. There's plenty of baseball fans who've never played, who watch the game, who love going to games. Lacrosse doesn't have that. And let me give you the other, just this anecdotal, and it happens to this day. So when I proposed this book, when I told people I'm working on a book about lacrosse, and when I've told people that I wrote a book about lacrosse, that I have a book on lacrosse out, if they're not lacrosse people, I can't tell you how many times I could almost see the eyes glaze over. Oh, lacrosse. The game has an image, and the fact is that among non-lacrosse people, the Duke lacrosse case and the murder of Yardley Love still lingers because they seem to have certified in some ways the understandable sort of cliche of lacrosse as this sort of upper class prep school sport.
Right.
It's I would argue in my book, I delve into all those things. I felt like I need to examine the cliche and perhaps prove it. But at the same time, I was fascinated by the exceptions to the cliche and the fact that actually this is a much more multidimensional game than people understand. And even frankly, at times, I think people within the sport really understand. Like, I actually think that, this sport is much deeper, wider, and more fascinating than even many in the sport really understand. Even though people in the sport absolutely love the sport and are devoted to it. And that's why I agree with you. The Olympics are incredibly important because there is no platform like the Olympics. There is no logo like the rings. And there is, as a marketing and sort of expansion creating tool. And World Lacrosse deserves all credit for coming up with sixes and getting into the Olympics. It was a really smart play. But and as Kyle Harrison, the great player for Johns Hopkins, told me, 2028 is a way for us to reintroduce the sport to America.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And he said that in the context of, there are some things that we're dealing with in the sport that need to be corrected, that need to be cleaned up in time for that. So it's not like the sport doesn't have things that it needs, including its problems with its image. And what would be better? Because I will tell you, whenever people's eyes glazed over, when I'd say I'm working on a book about lacrosse, I would say that, but then I would go into the Native American element, the fact that the game is driven, the growth in the game has been driven largely by the expansion of women and Title IX, its connection to Wall Street, its connection to the military, all the different aspects, including the negative aspects of binge drinking, for example. But everything about it is far more interesting and indicative of who we are as a people than people really understand. And when I would go into it, everyone would say, "Oh my God, I didn't know that. I had no idea about the Native American. I didn't know about that more lacrosse players than any other sport had died at 9/11 in the World Trade Center." I mean, there is a depth and a great sort of latitude of the sport that people don't understand. The growth of the sport geographically has been driven almost exclusively by blue collar people like Bill Tierney and Brian Holman and Willie Scroggs and Kelly Amonte Hiller, pushing the sport all over. They didn't come from prep school backgrounds. They came from almost no money whatsoever. And yet they've been a great engine of growth for this sport. That's not talked about. And so when I would say that, when I would tell them that, people would say, "Oh my God, I find that interesting. I'd like to read about that." Well, it's the same thing. If you have the sport and you have the Native Americans front and center at the Olympics in 2028, and you have the Haudenosaunee, that is a picture of the sport that is completely different, that people don't understand, and that mainstream people are going to be exposed to. I mean, people watching the World Championships and frankly the NCAAs are lacrosse people. People watching the Olympics are everybody. And this is indeed a chance for the sport to reintroduce itself in a positive way and an inclusive way, and one that obviously pays tribute to the soul of the game, the Haudenosaunee. And that is a completely different picture than that of George Hughley or the Duke Lacrosse Party or any other kind of cliche about the Lax Bros that have sort of really dominated the idea and the image of the sport in mainstream America.
Which, by the way, I sorry to interrupt you, Scott, but I think on that point are harder things for a sport like lacrosse to overcome, right? I mean, I don't want to compare it to the NFL because that's the mighty beast that rules everything. But when the NFL has a controversy, whether it be concussions or Ray Rice or things that come along, people just move on and they want their football. Lacrosse, that can put a real stop on the sport growing. And like you said, some of those old cliches come to life, and it's a little tougher for lacrosse to overcome. Scott, there's so much more we could talk about, but we want people to read the book. There was so many stories that we barely touched on or didn't touch on that have Syracuse, Onondaga, Haudenosaunee references. So folks couldn't recommend it enough. Scott did an incredible job, over 6 years of research and interviews, over 300 interviews, as he mentioned. And it is one of the definitive reads on the sport. And I highly encourage people to get out there and do it and read it. And Scott, I can't thank you enough for your time, for coming on the pod with us today, but bigger thank you for writing this book and putting it out there. I think it's going to be something that people for years can reference as a true history of the game and a true representation of what the American game is. It's an appropriate title. I know authors and people involved in books, sometimes you could just rack your brain forever. What the title is. It's so important. It's got to grab you. It's got to be 3 or 4 words, and it's just got to be the perfect thing. And I think the American game is the perfect title for this book. Thank you for writing it, and thank you for coming on with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
All right, look, guys, football is essentially here. Syracuse has reported for training camp. We're a month away from the first game, Syracuse, Tennessee in Atlanta. Let's do this thing. And a reminder, you see it on your screen there, being a Syracuse Sports Insider gives you the first reports from training camp. When Chris Carlson, Javon Edmonds, and I walk off the field, the first thing we do is text you videos, photos, and insight from Syracuse football training camp. We are here. Let's dig in. But before the pads come on and we really start talking football, I put it out to our Syracuse Sports Insiders to give me 25 thoughts on the season here as 2025 Syracuse football training camp and the 2025 season approaches. So this is just going to be like a podcast thought bubble. I'm not going to answer these. I'm just going to go through 25 thoughts from our insiders and what was on your mind and is on your mind as training camp begins. Okay, ready? Deep breath. Here we go. Rapid fire. And we're underway. Number 1, Will F. survive in 25. Let's get through the year without our young core, with our young core healthy, surprise some teams, and beat the brakes off everyone in 2026. Already looking to next year. I have a nagging feeling that Steve Angeli will be QB1. Number 2, Frank P. starting offensive line, starting D-backs, starting kicker. That's what's on his mind here. Number 3, Michael W. says, is our O-line going to be better or worse? Where does Jonte Cook stand on the depth chart, and which true freshman will get the most snaps in 2025? James L., the O-line seems to be the key to how much of the success this team may or may not achieve. Do we have 5 reliable starters and a few capable reserves that can compete at a higher level? Number 5, Rondell says, I really want to see Malachi James on the field a ton this year. I feel like he could be definitely our most dynamic X factor. From Gabe, who says, ask the players if they play as themselves or Syracuse on EA Sports College Football 26 for video games. Mark B, will we see a uniform change this year? I really hate the word orange listed on the front of the jersey. Kevin C, which freshman besides Demetrius Samuel will contribute, and how will the linebacker position shake out? Number 9, Jake N. How will Fran Brown respond if the team struggles? Syracuse started 5-1 last year. What if they come out sluggish and end up at like 2-4? With our schedule, it can happen, but I have total faith in Fran Brown if so. Number 10, Dennis says quarterback, running backs, schedule. Number 11, Eddie P, Ricky versus Steve, especially since Trevor Pena suggested that he left initially because he didn't see Ricky Collins as being able to get him the ball. Less than a month later, Syracuse goes and grabs Steve Angeli in the portal. Number 12, James W. The running back room feels like a big question mark. Yassine Willis, should be the man. But past that, Nixon's coming off injury. The Malachis are fast but raw, and I have no clue about Jaden Hart, and Tylee Kill is a freshman. Different James W. says, will we have a punt blocked this year? Special teams cost Syracuse the Stanford game and nearly the UNLV game. Number 14, TK, my man, QB long ball accuracy, kickoff specialist. Can he get it through the goalposts, and defensive line 20-yard dash times? It's a very specific thing to want to know, but he's a big football fan. From Porter, number 15, both lines, offensive and defensive lines, have multiple transfers expected to play impactful roles What do the rotations and the depth look like? 16 from my guy, Nick. Opinions on the freshmen that were not here for spring ball, especially the linemen, along with new transfer faces like Pringle, Rice, Collins, and Ferguson. The Dahmer has number 17. He says, the main thing to me, they're playing college football 26. It's the offensive and defensive line. Are they going to be good? Because in the game, they don't play good. Number 18, Michael Antonio. What is the staff doing to develop a better defense? Madden Cuse is number 19, and he wants to know if the wide receivers will still have hands this year with a new wide receiver coach. Number 20, from Doug S., how does Syracuse keep that momentum from last season with new players at the positions that carried us last year? Number 21, Rob W., will the defense step up this year? Will a consistent and reliable kicker emerge? And what fresh faces, freshmen and transfer, will shine? Number 22 from Bob, how much of the offense scheme-wise is a continuation of what was and or installed in the spring, and how much is still to be done? Is that impacted by who the starting quarterback is? Number 23 from Che, do you think we are underestimating Will Nixon? Going back to the running back position, he could be a serious X factor for major playing time. Running back's a position that's a little foggy, given that Syracuse only has 3 guys with game experience. Number 24, Tampa Ron. As Orange fans, it's easy to get sucked into this year's team is good as last year because of the last 20 years experience that we have endured. With Fran and the rest of the staff have shown us is they will have Syracuse prepared and relevant and may even shock some of us diehard fans with their level of competitiveness. And last, but certainly not least, number 25 from Stephen G. Take or give the 14 points against Tennessee. As I speak, as I record this, that game is 1 month away. Remember, Tennessee has a quarterback competition of their own going on. They've got some drama in camp already. So here's what I know. Football is here. We are talking real football, players on the field, camp updates to come, and so much more. Stay tuned. We're going to have regular training camp podcasts coming your way. Our Syracuse Sports Insiders will get texts every time we're at practice. The first thing we do is send you those updates. That is one of the great benefits of being a Syracuse Sports Insider. It's just $3.99 a month. You could try it free for 2 weeks. The info right there on your screen and in the show notes on how you can sign up today. Thanks to SL Price, my guy Scott, who wrote the greatest book I've ever read and the best thing I've ever read, frankly, about the sport of lacrosse. Highly encourage you to pick up and read that book. Looking for a great beach summer read for the rest of the summer here. Thanks for that engaging and interesting conversation on my favorite sport, the best sport, the medicine game, lacrosse. Really appreciate that. Looking forward to hearing from you guys throughout SU football training camp as well. But that's going to do it for this edition of Syracuse Sports. Thanks for hanging with us, guys. Just a reminder to follow and subscribe wherever you get your pods, on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, we heard it a little earlier in the show, and if you want your original music featured here on Syracuse Sports, you know we'd love to do it. All the info in the show notes on how to get in touch. James and the Q Sonics, this one.